Hi folks, this is Tim Garman for SIT on NZDP101, and I'm going to be just looking at the Select and Mask feature, which will be particularly useful for weeks 13 to 14 of 101. And Select and Mask has been around for a little while now, and Adobe have been refining it and improving it along the way, so it's about time to update this video. So I'm going to start with the Azaria and car image that you may be familiar with, and I'm going to open up the Melissa Hobbs image, which will open in Camera Raw. So we'll open that as a smart object, and what I'm just going to do is drag the tab so that the palette becomes a floating palette. And what I can then do is, I've got my layers palette open, and you can see the layer there, and it's indicating it's a smart object. I can drag that layer and drop it onto the background, and now I can close the Melissa Hobbs image, and you can see that in the layer palette I've now got two layers, and Melissa Hobbs has come in as a smart object. Obviously very large, so you need to reduce that down in size. So the first thing we'll do is exactly that. I can either go to the edit menu and free transform, but I see here on the Mac it's Command T, Control T on a PC. That might also be right click T, I'm not sure. But let's do that. Now it's just worth pointing out that if you're zoomed in, you won't see the edges of the bounding box when you go into free transform. So you may want to zoom out so you can see that, because we're going to need to get to the corner to drag it in so that we can reduce it in size. And just a reminder that on the latest versions of Photoshop, by default, you don't need to hold the Shift key down when you resize. It remains in proportion just by dragging the corners. But if you happen to be on an older version of Photoshop, you don't want to be stretching or squashing this image, so you can hold the Shift key down, and that will constrain the proportions as you drag that corner in. If you're on a newer version of Photoshop and you happen to hold the Shift key down as well, that's when you can end up squashing or stretching your image. So remember, current versions of Photoshop, it's by default without the Shift key, and older versions hold the Shift key down when you resize. So as well as resizing, we need to flip it over. So I'm going to go back up to transform, down to flip horizontal, and just think about positioning this as the study guide suggests, I believe. And you'll notice that the shoulder is cropped there, so we want to just enlarge it so that we don't see a cropped shoulder on the image. So I can double click, and that's positioned and resized. And you'll notice if I go to the mover tool, I can still move that around. So there's still image available outside of the image area if I want to reposition. So let's increase that in size. Now what I'm going to do is just point out how to get into Select and Mask. Now we can go into the Select menu, and we've got Select and Mask option available there. Also, if I happen to be on a selection tool, it becomes available in the options strip at the top. But it's also worth mentioning that if we had a mask, we don't actually have a mask at the moment, but if we did have a mask, we can control click the mask and get an option to go into Select and Mask there. I'm going to just click at the top. So now we're in the Select and Mask window, and this is a new window within Photoshop, and we're looking at an option strip across the top, We've obviously still got the main menu above, and tools on the left, and the properties panel on the right with some tabs. Now, at the moment, we're only seeing the bottom layer of the two layers that we had in Photoshop, and that's simply because we've got the transparency set to 100%. As we reduce that down, we see Melissa Hobbs comes into view. Now, that's not changing the image at all, it's just changing the way we view it. And above this slider, we've got a view mode. Now, I want to do a couple of things before we really get into looking at that. But these are all different ways of viewing the work that we're doing. So let's do the first thing. Let's make sure that we've got the preset set to default. So there's no previous settings remembered in here. So we're going to start with a completely new, at a new starting place. And in the option strip, I'm going to select the Select Subject button. So that's identified the subject, and I can prove that because now we can see when we slide the slider, we're only affecting the area that's masked out. So it's created a mask around Melissa Hobbs, down at the edge of her hair, and that's going to be the edge that we want to refine and improve upon if we can. But we can change the way we view that. So now that we've got a mask, let's have a look at these view modes. So the first one's called onion skin, and that's as if we're looking at it through a sheet of tracing paper, and we can change the transparency of that tracing paper. The next view is marching ants, which just simply shows us the area we have selected. Or we've got an overlay, which gives us a red overlay, and actually we can change the color if red's not appropriate just by clicking here, but we can also change the opacity of that overlay. Or we've got a black overlay, and that might be particularly helpful because it's quite a high contrast and we can see what's going on down the edge of her hair. But again, we can change the opacity. Same with white. And again, the slider works with white. We've got black. Now that shows us something slightly different because that's just showing us the mask. So there's no slider here, and that can be useful because we can then identify exactly what is masked and how that mask is looking. And lastly, we've got just a simple overlay or simple view showing the layers. So I'm going to have that selected at, let's leave it on onion skin for the moment. So over on the left, at the top we've got a quick selection tool. So let's just zoom into this image. And with that tool selected, we've got some controls over brush size. And as we use this, we'll see that although it's not doing a great job because it's bringing back all of this wall area, but it is trying to find the edge of that hair. Now, you'll notice if I can put this on the darker area, we've got a little plus in the cursor, and we've got plus and minus options here, so we can add to and subtract from our mask, but we can also do that by using the Option key on a Mac, Alt key on a PC, and that would be quicker. And you see that it's toggling through that as I do that. So I could go back and paint that out again. I'm holding down the Option Alt key at the moment. And there is a benefit in doing this because as you do this, Photoshop begins to understand what it is exactly that you're trying to select, and let's just repaint that back in. There is some difficulty with this image because if I put the transparency down to 0, you'll see that there's not a lot of contrast between the colour of Melissa's hair and the wall behind. So that's not an easy area to isolate. But that's one tool that you can use depending on the image that you're working on. The next one down is the Refine Edge brush tool, and I'll come back to that. But let's have a look at the brush tool. Again, we've got options and a familiar brush size and hardness control. Let's just take that down, the size of the brush a bit, perhaps a bit more. Hardness I'm going to leave just there for the moment. And we might just look at a different view. So let's have a look at the actual mask. And when we look at that, we see first of all that we've got a bit of a white edge down where the end of the Melissa image ends. So we can paint that out. And now obviously that's the wrong way round. It's painting white onto the black. So I'm going to undo that and hold down the Option key, which you'll see the cursor plus and minus, it changes to a minus in the cursor. And so I've got the Option or the Alt key held down, and I can just paint over that, and I'm now painting black, but obviously I don't want to paint black inside the mask, so I'll undo that. Let's just check around and see if there's anything else. Let's zoom out a bit. That's okay. So the thing about the mask is that where it's grey, it's going to be partly transparent. So it may be that we're going to want to not paint black, but paint white and just tidy up some of that edge. Particularly where the edge of the hair is, it might be helpful just to fade that mask in. So we can do that just using the brush tool. The navigation using the space bar gives us a hand. Now we can look at how that's looking on a different view. No line down here now. Still need to improve on this hairline. Okay, one last thing I'll just do before I move on to another tool is just sort out that corner piece. Just with the brush tool, we can just, maybe that's a bit too much. And in fact, let's take the hardness down, or in fact, increase the hardness, I should say, just so that we've got a better edge there. Okay, so let's have a look at the object selection tool. And in order to show you how this works, I'm going to close down SelectAndMask and just switch off the top layer and choose the background layer, and then go back into SelectAndMask. We'll reduce transparency so we can see what's going on. Now, if we choose the object selection tool, we've got some different ways we can work with the selection. We can add to a selection and subtract or intersect with a selection. We've got what is effectively an automatic object finder, which we want to have ticked if we want to use it. And we've got a way of refreshing our selection. We've got a way of displaying our selection, and we've got some further controls over the selection that we make. Additionally, we start by default with a rectangular marquee tool. We've got the option to work freehand with a lasso tool as well. And then we've got sample all layers and the option to have a hard edge or a softer edge. So first of all, you'll notice that with the object selection tool selected, it identifies shapes straight away. And it will even, I think, identify some of those shapes as well. But we can, if we want to select some of these rocks, for instance, it doesn't automatically identify them. But if we put a rectangle around there and then reduce the transparency, we notice straight away that that area has been isolated. And of course, there's a bit there that if we were trying to mask the rocks, we probably want to do a bit more work on it just to remove some of this, but that's an instant way of creating a selection. So we can do the same with the area it's already identifying as a very obvious shape with contrast around it. So now we see we've got that selected. And we can obviously go in and refine that further. So just demonstrating some more of these options up in the options strip. That's a way of showing areas that are obvious objects that can be selected. And that's really the object selection tool. So we've got a lasso tool and a polygonal lasso tool for other selections, and a hand tool for moving around, navigating the screen, and a magnifying glass for zooming in and out. Let's go back to having both layers selected to show this in more detail. So let's have another look at the mask on the view, on the view mode. We'll just blow that up or zoom in, and now have a look at the refine edge tool. And if we select that tool, we've got the similar options in the options strip for brush size, but we can just paint down the edge and allow Photoshop and SelectAndMask to find the edge that we're trying to isolate. And you see now there's a bit more hair detail located. It does need refining further, and so what we might do is select the brush tool and just go down that edge, and you see where there are some very pale greys. That's some transparency coming in, which we don't want to see. So I've got the brush set at not maximum hardness, so there's a bit of a soft edge to this brush at the moment. So I can come down here and just paint some of that out. Might want to just increase that soft edge. And just tidy up that mask. And we can have a look at the onion skin and see how that's looking. And there's no reason why we can't paint on the onion skin as well. So we might want to take some of that out. I'm now holding the Option or the Alt key down. Okay, let's have a look at some of these other options we have on the right. Notice we've got the Remember Settings button checked, so we can come back into SelectAndMask to these settings that we've already created. We've got an Object Aware and a Color Aware choice. So Object Aware tends to be better. In fact, if we mouse over them, it'll tell you what they're best for. Color Aware, best for objects that have got clear and defined contrast. And on this we haven't, because the wall is similar in colour to the hair, so I've left it on the Object Aware setting. So we'll close Refine mode. Look at edge detection. Well, this may not make a lot of difference, but we can just refine the radius of where we are drawing that line. You'll notice we've got some strange sort of artifacts appearing as we increase that, so perhaps not the best thing to do, but it does highlight the fact that we need to just repair some of that. And Smart Radius sometimes gives us a better result as well. But it is highlighting areas that we might need to just retouch a bit further. So probably best to leave that switched off. Global refinements gives us some control over the edge as well. And we can smooth it, we can feather it, feathering it will make it a softer edge. We can increase the contrast In fact, let's just see what these do. I don't think smoothing will do very much. It does, as we move it further up, you can see that there's a slightly softer edge to that, that hair. Feathering it will make it softer still. Contrast can be helpful to just identify that edge as well. And shift edge, well, if we've got that mask ending there, we can have that edge just jumping inwards, and we can perhaps demonstrate that. And a little bit of shift edge actually helps. But if we go the other way, it's going to make some of the wall appear. So we'll just set that round about there. And we can invert that selection as well. So lastly, we've got output settings. Decontaminate colors, that can help as well, and can help to eliminate fringing around the edges. And it will just help to expand some of the color to remove the fringing. And we can also control how we output this mask. So the default is new layer with a layer mask, so that will give us a copy when we come back into Photoshop, a copy or a duplicate layer. But we can also create a new layer by itself, or even a new document, and put the editing that we've done into a completely new document, or a new document with a layer mask. So that's most of what I wanted to demonstrate in Select and Mask. It is worth saying that if we look at the background wall, as I've mentioned, there's very little contrast between the colour of the wall and her hair. So in some respects, this is not a good example to be demonstrating Select and Mask on. Having said that, of course, some of the images we want to work on don't offer us perfect contrast between what we're trying to select and its background. So we have to develop lots of different strategies for the best ways to work on our images. I'm just going to come out of Select and Mask now, and just to show you an example, if I open up the image for assignment E, which you're going to have to cut out, and that looks like a dreadful thing to try and cut out around that hair, but there is quite good contrast. She's on a white background. Now she needs to be placed into a beach scene, and you'll have the beach background to download, and you'll have this image to download from Blackboard, and you'll be putting her into the beach background. Make sure you put the whole of this image into the beach first, and then mask her hair out. So that's the non-destructive approach to doing that. So we're going to have the whole of this image right to the edges in the beach background, and then mask around her hair. And you'll find that because there's good contrast, although you may not be able to get every single fine hair at the end of the hair, you'll be able to get quite a lot of it. So have a go at that, and I think you'll find it offers better opportunities to create a mask than perhaps the Melissa Hobbs image.